My name is Ben Salvatore, and there is something really wrong happening in the town I call home. I'm a single father living in an unusual town, with a small population surrounded by an expansive forest, with pockets of untamed wilderness. However, my fears transcend the typical dangers of large predators that lurk in the forest depths. Instead, my tale delves into secretive cults practicing witchcraft, abducting innocent children for their sinister devil-worshipping rituals and sacrifices, all in pursuit of elusive power. I fear the rabbit hole goes deeper into the unknown than the surface horrors. This right here is my story. The morning sun crept over the horizon as I drove the car through the picturesque woods. Multicolored red and orange fallen leaves covered the roadsides. Occasional gusts of wind sent bunches of leaves swirling in a graceful ballet, a whirlwind of colors that danced and twirled before settling back to the ground. The autumn air held a crisp chill. The scenery looked like a beautiful painting. The routine of driving my 6-year-old daughter Rose to school had become a cherished ritual, a tranquil start to the day. The familiar route to her school, each turn and stop sign ingrained in my memory. She chattered away, her voice a melody that filled the air with joy. Her excitement for the day ahead lifted my spirits. Sometimes she would point out peculiar shapes of clouds in the sky, or at beautiful spiral spider webs suspended between bushes and trees. I would watch her sometimes through the rearview mirror, marveling at her innocence. Her unique, bright, heterochromic eyes, one a striking green and the other a mesmerizing blue, sparkled as she stared out the car windows, curious about the world around her. Her golden locks bounced as she twisted and turned in her seat to show me what she had discovered outside. Each morning I made it part of my routine to take Rose to school, instead of relying on the public school bus. The reason I do this is because a couple years ago, on separate occasions, 2 children had vanished. Both incidents occurred in the month of October, with both children missing after attending school. Their disappearances haunting the school's reputation. Despite the relentless efforts of the authorities, the police were unable to solve the mysterious disappearances. The only eerie clue left behind was a totem crafted from twigs, meticulously arranged in the shape of a pentagram with the children's teeth placed in the center. The cryptic discovery led investigators to suspect a disturbing connection between both cases. God have mercy on the parents. The mere thought of losing Rose sends shivers down my spine. It's a bone-chilling scenario I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy. The frustration of not having answers, not knowing what happened to them, or if they were even alive anymore. The nightmare would consume me. Rumors began to swirl amongst the townfolk. The community suspected a secretive cult to be involved. On very rare occasion, some townfolk would find strange symbols etched into trees deep in the woods. Whether it was related to the disappearance of the children is still unknown. Our town, Ravenswood, otherwise, was a peaceful community, nestled between hills and thick forest. Despite this, I planned to relocate Rose to a different school in a safer part of town. However, being a single father juggling work and household responsibilities, finding the time to make the switch felt like an overwhelming task. Tragically, I lost my partner during childbirth, and it shattered my world. I never really got over what had happened, but eventually I learned to live with it, especially for Rose's sake. She was a beautiful reminder of my late wife. They shared the same rare eyes and infectious, radiant smile. The love I had once reserved for my late wife, I now repurposed and gave to Rose. She was now my world. Arriving at her school, I parked up and made it a point to escort Rose into her class every day, unwilling to take any chances. Her small hand slipped into mine, and we walked together. Rose skipped beside me, her backpack bouncing with each step. We reached her classroom and I knelt down to her level, ruffling her golden hair gently. "Have a wonderful day, sweetheart," I whispered, planting a kiss on her forehead. She darted off, joining her friends at a table covered in colorful books and crayons. As I stood up, I caught the gaze of Rose's teacher, Miss Violet. Her warm smile greeted me as always as she cradled and stroked her sleek black cat, Salem. Salem wasn't just Miss Violet's pet. He was a beloved figure, the class pet. The children adored him. His presence seemed to instill a sense of care, love, and compassion among them.
Good morning, Mr. Salvatore.
Ms. Violet greeted me, her smile mesmerizing. Good morning, Miss Violet. I hope Rose hasn't caused any trouble lately. Miss Violet chuckled softly.
Never any trouble at all. She is a joy to have in class. You must be incredibly proud of her.
Yes, I sure am. She brings so much joy into my life. She takes after her mother in so many ways. Her personality and even the way she looks.
Your daughter's eyes are beautiful. How rare it is to witness a person with two different colored eyes, and both eyes displaying such vibrant and striking colors. I must admit, I'm a bit envious. They're truly stunning.
I smiled, a hint of pride swelling within me. Miss Violet was beautiful in her own right. An aura of timelessness surrounded her. Her beauty seemed unaffected by time. She was as youthful and pleasant as the day I first met her. There was a magnetic allure that seemed to draw me in despite my efforts to remain composed. Before my admiration became too apparent, I managed to bid Miss Violet goodbye and turned to leave, determined to suppress the inappropriate thoughts that lingered longer than they should have. Later that afternoon, as part of my usual routine, I picked up Rose from school. She bubbled with enthusiasm about her day, stories about her friends in Salem, the loving cat. Her chatter filled the car with joy as we drove home. Fortunately, our residence was situated on fields of ample land, snugly nestled against the forest's edge. Despite the picturesque setting, Rose was strictly forbidden from venturing into the woods. The dense woodland posed formidable dangers. I feared Rose could become lost in its labyrinth of paths. Moreover, my concerns extended beyond mere navigation. Wild predators such as bobcats, wolves, and black bears roamed these woods. I vividly remembered instances of black bears scavenging through our trash in the dead of night, effortlessly overturning heavy objects. The thought of these formidable creatures filled me with dread, especially when considering the potential threat they posed to my beloved daughter. Back home, I prepared our favorite meal, spaghetti bolognese, for dinner together. Laughter filled the air, and the aroma of simmering tomato sauce enveloped the cozy kitchen. Rose twirled her pasta with her fork in spirals, playfully creating what she proudly dubbed spaghetti monsters. I cherished the moment, admiring my daughter's creativity as we savored our meal. After dinner, it was time for bed. As the evening settled into a peaceful quiet, with loving care I tucked Rose into bed, pulling her blanket snugly around her, cocooning her in its warmth and comfort. Seated by her side on the edge of the bed, I read her chosen story for the evening. Together we explored the pages of magical worlds, lost in tales of daring adventures and fantastic lands. Once Rose fell asleep, I walked over to her window to draw the curtain shut. As my hand reached for the curtains, a flicker of movement in the shadows caught my eye. For a moment I thought I saw someone standing in the yard, by one of the Victorian lampposts positioned outside Rose's window. I squinted to distinguish any familiar features, but the figure remained shrouded in the veil of the night. When I blinked a few times, the figure disappeared. Confused, I shrugged the moment off to exhaustion. After all, it had been a long day. I softly walked over to the doorway and left the bedroom door slightly ajar, casting a gentle glow in the room. I lingered in the doorway a moment, watching her chest rise and fall in rhythmic breaths, a comforting sight. Smiling, I tiptoed out of the room, leaving Rose to dream, and made my way to my own bed. That night, I dreamed of my late wife. My thoughts drifted to the cherished memories of her laughter when we laid in bed together, embracing each other beneath the sheets, staring into each other's eyes, sharing silent conversations. Her radiant smile, filling me with a sense of inner warmth and contentment. However, the dream shifted me into a classroom. It was Rose's classroom, and I found myself standing with Miss Violet. She exuded an effortless allure, leaning casually against the wall, her fingers gently curling her glossy black hair. As we conversed, her words carried subtle flirtation, stirring a feeling of guilt within me. Yet I couldn't help being enchanted by her. Her presence, like that of a siren, beckoned me closer to her. as if weaving an irresistible spell. She whispered something into my ear, a soft murmur that enticed me to lean in closer, craving to decipher the whispered secrets she intended for me alone. Her whisper seemed to intensify, growing louder and more urgent. "Dad? Daddy? Dad!" Abruptly, I was jolted awake from my dream with Rose stood by my bedside, panic etched across her face, her voice urgently calling out to me. Reality flooded back in an instant. Glancing toward my bedside table, my eyes settled on the digital clock. The luminous red numbers displayed the eerie time, 3:33 a.m. I quickly sat up and hugged my darling daughter in a reassuring embrace, then gently held her away at arm's length, locking eyes with her. Her fragile, tiny hands wiped away her tears that rolled down her flushed cheeks. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice tender yet filled with worry, seeking to understand the source of her distress. It was then that my innocent young daughter began to recount a chilling event she had experienced that very night. In the tranquility of her peaceful sleep, Rose gradually stirred awake to the distant yet faint sound of a woman's voice, delicately calling her name. Initially, she dismissed it, attributing to a dream or her imagination. In the dimness of her room, lying in bed under her blanket with only her piercing eyes peering over its edge, she scanned the darkness, her gaze landing on the soft glow of the lamppost light that filtered through a slight gap in the curtains, casting a beam of light reaching out towards her. As she lay frozen, the persistent call of her name, Rose, became more distinct and louder. Dread gripped her as she grappled with the realization that this wasn't a dream. Succumbing to panic, she dashed towards the only source of light, her trembling hands yanking the curtains apart. In that moment, her heart seemed to halt, then wildly accelerate as if a colossal hand had seized it, violently thrusting her pulse through her veins at an unnerving pace. Glancing out of her bedroom window, Rose's eyes widened in shock. In the yard stood an elderly woman, completely naked, her gaze fixed directly on Rose. The woman wore a malevolent smile, and in eerie repetition, uttered Rose's name at short, unsettling intervals. Her skin resembled the creased lines of an ancient map, wrinkled and weathered, covered with patches of discolored blemishes, while her sunken, hollowed eyes seemed like dark vortexes ready to engulf Rose into another dimension. Her nails extended like sinister, elongated claws, dirty with grime, the tips stained with a dark crimson hue resembling blood. The hag-like woman lifted her hand, waving it, beckoning Rose with an eerie invitation to step outside and join her. The woman's menacing gaze paralyzed her with overwhelming terror. Rose's feet, as though covered in blocks of concrete, remained rooted to the carpeted bedroom floor. The sheer horror of the woman's appearance rendered Rose speechless, her tongue held captive by the ghastly sight before her. Just when she believed her nightmare couldn't get any worse, the old woman sprung onto the black iron lamppost, climbing it with alarming agility. Her unwavering, eerie gaze fixed on Rose, never breaking eye contact. As she quickly ascended the pole, her body contorting in positions similar to a spider, her sharp toenails clawed against the metal. The woman's facial expression morphed from a sinister smile to menacing visage of pure hatred as she continued to climb a little higher, till soon after she gradually reached the top, positioning herself directly across Rose's bedroom window. Thankfully, the window stood firmly shut, acting as a barrier between Rose and the hag perched atop the lamppost. With her legs coiled around the pole, the malevolent figure stared directly at Rose, her evil glare piercing Rose's innocence. Unable to contain her fear, Rose screamed and ran towards her father's room, seeking refuge from the chilling encounter. After Rose had finished explaining her horrifying encounter, I gently picked her up and carried her into her bedroom. Stepping toward the window, I peered outside only to see the yard empty, except for the faint glow cast by the nearby lamppost. Beyond it lay the vast expanse of trees stretching into the dark woods for miles. It seemed more than mere coincidence that earlier, while tucking Rose into bed, I caught sight of a figure, and now my daughter had witnessed someone outside her window. Taking no chances, I made sure all doors and windows throughout our home were secured, and allowed Rose to sleep beside me for the night. In the morning, the sunlight offered a semblance of relief from my lingering paranoia. I rationalized that maybe it was an attempted break-in robbery, trying to deny the terrifying notion that it could be connected to the recent kidnappings of children. As I escorted Rose to the car for school, curiosity got the better of me to inspect the area around the lamppost, hoping to confirm whether someone had been there, spying on my daughter last night. Yet to my relief, there was no trace of anyone. No footprints or clues of any sort. It provided a degree of reassurance, although uncertainty still lingered. I drove Rose to school and took a moment to brief her head teacher, Mrs. Marshall, about the unsettling events from the previous night before escorting Rose to her classroom. I stepped into her office, closing the door behind me, and sat at a chair on the opposite side of her desk, facing her. I continued briefing her, mentioning the possibility that Rose might seem a bit off or different today due to her lack of sleep, and the residual effects of possibly seeing an elderly woman standing outside her bedroom window. Mrs. Marshall seemed equally concerned, her expression a mix of concern and apprehension. She questioned me for details about the incident and the woman's appearance. The one odd particular question that really stood out to me was when she asked me about the time the incident occurred. When I mentioned it was around 3:30 a.m., she reacted with a gasp, as if it were something significant. She explained to me that this time was the witching hour. She eerily explained that the witching hour is also the devil's hour, and it's a time of night that is associated with supernatural events, whereby witches appear and be at their most powerful. Given our close-knit community's inclination towards superstition, I didn't take offense and rather understood the reference. I was grateful that Mrs. Marshall took the matter seriously. She followed up with another odd question, whether I had come across any cryptic marks, symbols, or etchings of any kind within our property. I admitted that I hadn't actively seen any, but I hadn't thoroughly checked either. I approached Mrs. Marshall with a sense of urgency, asking her the question that had been haunting me, whether she knew if what had happened to Rose was linked to the string of disappearances among the school children. At first, she seemed hesitant to answer, breaking eye contact as though concealing a truth she wished to keep buried. With a reluctant sigh, she began to explain a chilling narrative of unsettling events. When the children had disappeared, the police, in their relentless pursuit of answers, interrogated anybody remotely associated with the missing children, including herself. Desperate to find answers, the police shared information about totems purposely placed in the missing children's homes, a grim signature, a proud calling card left behind by a devil-worshipping cult. But Mrs. Marshall shared a different opinion, one that delved deeper. She explained that Ravenswood held a secret, one that had lingered in the shadows for generations. Indeed, there existed secretive cults, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid the walls might have ears. One in particular involved in unspeakable rituals and dark pacts. Among them was the town's most influential figures, their reach in the highest echelons of power. The police, maybe even the mayor. The gravity of Mrs. Marshall's words shocked and scared me. Her revelation, I knew in some way, made sense to me. She continued, recounting a legacy hidden within her own lineage.
My grandparents lived in Ravenswood, and they were part of a secret order, a counterbalance to the evil cults amongst us. My grandparents were tasked with protecting our small community, safeguarding it against the dark forces. However,
she said, her eyes darting around nervously,
the balance had become fragile. The strange occurrences have been escalating. Unexplained disappearances, bizarre symbols etched into the town outskirts. I fear that the evil cult has been gaining strength. I believe I no longer have any choice and have to reveal the town's secret to protect Rose.
Mrs. Marshall then advised me against isolating Rose, emphasizing the importance of maintaining social connections to ensure there were people around us. She suggested that the individuals targeting Rose would want her alone and vulnerable. She assured me of Rose's safety at school, emphasizing that she would be well cared for, which provided a much-needed sense of reassurance. Leaving the office, I was confused, wondering if what Mrs. Marshall had revealed had any truth to it. How deep the roots of the secret cults reached. Despite any uncertainties, I was certain I needed to return home to inspect for any cult symbols that might have been drawn or etched onto my residence. I accompanied Rose to Miss Violet's class and confided in her about the disturbing events from the previous night. Feeling a sense of trust in Miss Violet, I shared Mrs. Marshall's peculiar narrative involving witches and cults.
I always knew my boss was a weirdo. You just confirmed my suspicions,
chuckled Miss Violet. Her comment struck a chord. Perhaps she was on to something. Hearing her candid thoughts about Mrs. Marshall felt reassuring. I was hesitant to believe in the existence of psychotic devil-worshipping cults with intentions to harm my child. It all seemed too far-fetched to be real.
Mr. Salvatore, you and I understand that our small town tends to hold on to outdated beliefs. Whenever there's a problem, their go-to explanation involves superstitions. Those unfortunate missing children and the police's struggle to crack the case led the town to scapegoat cults or witches. Rose is a vibrant, imaginative young girl. With Halloween on the horizon, it's natural for children to let their imaginations wander into the realm of the holiday spirit.
You're probably right. Thank you, Miss Violet. You saying it out loud makes me realize how absurd it all sounds. Her reassuring touch on my shoulder made me blush. I couldn't help but marvel at her perfection. Not only was she stunningly beautiful, intelligent, and compassionate, but her ability to articulate exactly what I needed to hear made me feel a lot better. Later that day, after picking up Rose from school and arriving home, I remained vigilant, scanning the trees that surrounded our home and driveway, staying watchful for any hints of ominous symbols or cult-related markings. As Rose and I neared the front door of our home, I conducted a thorough examination above and around the doorframe, yet discovering nothing suspicious. Doubt began to creep in. Maybe Mrs. Marshall was mistaken. Maybe our home and my daughter weren't the intended focus of any cult. However, I persisted, determined to leave no stone unturned. I went to reinvestigate the back of our property, specifically focusing on the area outside Rose's bedroom window, where she had encountered the haunting woman. Moving around the rear of the house, I cast a quick glance at the dense woods that surrounded the property. The woods acted as a barrier between us and civilization. At night, I could see why a child might imagine a cryptid lurking in the shadows. It even made me feel a tad uneasy. Determined to investigate further, I cautiously approached the lamppost that Rose had described, the very one the hag-like woman supposedly ascended. To my chilling astonishment, upon closer inspection, I discovered something that validated Rose's story. Scratch marks etched into the iron pole had scraped off the black paint, forming a trail that eerily led towards the top of the lamppost. A haunting feeling of anxiety consumed me, a sense of dread that settled in the pit of my stomach. This should be impossible. Then my disbelief turned into sheer alarm when I noticed another eerie detail etched into the post. A pentagram surrounded what appeared to be an eye in its center. I was momentarily frozen in horror. This couldn't be our reality, could it? I held my head in disbelief. We had become the focus of a cult. Something otherworldly had ascended that pole, lurking outside my daughter's window. The thought of a supernatural presence observing my child filled me with a chilling fear that was beyond comprehension. That night was when things got considerably worse. As the hands of the clock inched forward to midnight, Rose and I fell asleep, unaware of the impending horrors that awaited us. Before long, the witching hour was upon us once again. At the stroke of 3:33 a.m., I was jolted awake by a chilling disruption. Footsteps that sounded unmistakably like hooves reverberated from outside the front entrance. I could hear the heavy hoofs hauntingly distinct, walking on the wooden porch, circling the house. I tried to make sense of it. What wild animal with hooves inhabited the forest? Could it have been deer or elk? The sound resembled the size of elk steps, dismissing the possibility of deer with their more delicate steps. I sat up in my bed, compelled to investigate the noises from outside. I reached for my bedside lamp switch, only to find to my disappointment that it wasn't working. Odd, I thought, as I looked over at my bedside clock, which curiously shared the same fate. its display blank. Cautiously, I got out of bed and creeped over towards my light switch. I didn't want to alert whatever was outside lurking around my house, but I wanted to confirm my suspicion that the power was out. When I flicked the light switch on, it confirmed my fears. There was an electricity outage. I slowly approached my bedroom window, seeking a vantage point, hoping to get a bird's-eye view of whatever was stomping around my home. But with the absence of the usual lamppost glow, I couldn't see anything in the darkness. Only vague outlines of bushes and creepy weathered oak trees. Before I descended the stairs, I went to check on Rose. Peering into her room, I saw her in bed wrapped in her blanket, her back towards me, asleep and undisturbed. Assured that she was okay, I silently navigated downstairs, quietly retrieving a candle and matches from a nearby cupboard. As discreetly as I could, I struck a match, lit the candle and kindled the flame. It illuminated the house, casting dancing shadows. Regrettably, I did not possess a firearm. I had deliberately chosen not to have one in the house for the safety of my daughter Rose. While I could have secured it in a locked cabinet, I feared her inquisitive nature might lead her to discover a way to access it, posing a potential danger. Stealthily, I made my way toward a window offering a view of the house's front. Peering out, the glow of my candle only allowed me to see part of the animal. My gaze met the sight of a dark, robust figure with thick black fur. Its legs bent back at the knee joint stood atop a sturdy hoof. Yet, it wasn't as imposing in size as I had anticipated. Abruptly, a foul and overpowering pungent scent struck me. A nauseating blend of earthy, potent musk with a metallic tinge similar to the scent of blood, causing me to almost gag. I hesitantly opened the front door to make the animal go away, but I couldn't have prepared myself for the unexpected ghastly sight before me. A chilling scene unfolded that surpassed even the most unsettling of nightmares. Before me loomed a black goat, its back burdened by a grotesque figure. An elderly, fat old woman mounted on it. Cruelly, she yanked on a metallic string or wire coiled around the poor creature's neck, mercilessly sawing away at its throat. The grotesque scene drenched in blood, its eyes bulging out, its tongue hanging out of its mouth. It tried to scream in agony, but its efforts were muffled by the sound of blood, gargling in its throat. Blood spurted in all directions, its legs finally giving way, succumbing to lifelessness as the sinister woman persisted in her grisly task of beheading the animal. The sharp string made scratching sounds as she tried to cut through bone. Suddenly, her actions halted as she slowly raised her blood-soaked face, meeting my gaze with a chilling smile. In a sudden, menacing motion, she lunged toward me as I swiftly slammed the door shut, narrowly evading her. I raced upstairs into Rose's bedroom. Fear and panic gripped me as I sought to hide my daughter from the nightmarish horror that had unfolded before my eyes. I cradled Rose and carried her out of her bedroom into mine. Inside was an ensuite bathroom that had a sturdy door. I figured it would be the safest spot for both of us. I swiftly grabbed my mobile phone resting on a charging pad by my bedside and hurried into the bathroom, securing the door behind us. Intent on calling the police for help, I glanced at my phone, only to find the battery indicator glowing red, signaling its imminent demise. I felt sick to my stomach with anxiety. Before panic could overwhelm me, Rose began to come around. Slowly opening her eyes, she looked up at me and asked, "What's wrong, Daddy?" "Nothing, sweetie. We're just going to play a game of hide and seek," I said, attempting to reassure my 6-year-old daughter. As the words left my mouth, the grim reality of the statement struck me. I was indeed hiding from someone that had quite literally decapitated a goat while smiling, just outside our front door. I was certain this person was also responsible for cutting the power to our house. I quickly dialed the police, whispering, fearful of being discovered by the deranged, sadistic woman.
Ravenswood Police, what is your emergency?
The operator's voice sounded calm and composed. "Someone is trying to break into my house, and I'm hiding with my 6-year-old daughter," I whispered, maintaining the lowest possible tone. The operator swiftly requested my address, and then inquired about my location within the house and whether the intruder was inside. Before I could respond to the operator's last question, I strained to listen for any sounds, urging my daughter to stay as quiet as she could to avoid alerting the intruder. In the unsettling silence, initially, all I could hear was a ringing sound in my ears, accompanied by the rapid thumping of my own heartbeat. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside our bedroom, followed by hurried footsteps. It sent shivers down my spine. This individual wasn't trying to be discreet. They were frantically searching for us, racing into my daughter's bedroom. They knew that I knew. They were coming for me.
Sir, is the intruder in your house?
Repeated the operator. With deep regret, I replied, yes.
Remain hidden where you are, sir, and ensure your bathroom door is locked. I'll stay on the line with you until the police arrive. They're on their way, and will be with you and your daughter shortly.
The operator instructed calmly. Okay, thank you. Please hurry. I pleaded with a sense of urgency lacing my words.
Please try to remain as calm and quiet as possible. They are almost there.
The operator reassured me before the line fell silent. Immediately after, I heard the aggressive swing of my bedroom door, followed by heavy, wet footsteps racing across the room, the sound of my belongings being knocked over and shattered on the floor. This deranged individual, who I now believed to be a witch, was growing increasingly impatient in her search for me and Rose. My blood ran cold as I realized that the only barrier separating the witch from us was the locked bathroom door. Suddenly, the frenzied footsteps thundered towards the bathroom and rattled the doorknob, discovering it was securely locked.
I know you're in there. Now please open the door, you little shit.
She found us, Daddy, said Rose innocently, fear evident in her beautiful eyes as she gazed up at me. Shh, baby, she can't get us if we keep the door closed. I reassured her, attempting to comfort her.
Open the door, Rose. I have a little baby puppy for you,
insisted the witch. The fact that she knew Rose's name could mean she was someone familiar to us.
The police are just a minute away, sir. I'll stay on the line until they arrive.
The voice on the phone assured me.
Open the fucking door.
The witch screamed, knocking on the door violently, the impact reverberating through my body, causing the door to vibrate with each impact. Rose's screams pierced the air, and panic began to grip me. The terrifying possibilities of what this witch might do to us flooded my mind. I envisioned her using that metal wire to sever our heads, and the thought made me feel physically ill. Finally, a sound of hope, a distant siren from approaching emergency vehicles. The operator confirmed that what I was hearing was indeed real. The relentless pounding on the door ceased, replaced by the sound of hurried footsteps retreating from the bedroom. I held Rose close, eagerly anticipating the arrival of the police, and then I heard it. A distinct sound of boots entering our bedroom and a reassuring knock on the bathroom door. The police were finally here to rescue us. When the police arrived, the witch had already fled the scene, abandoning her attack. However, she left behind a haunting display. A goat's head suspended by the same metal wire used to sever it, now coiled around the thick horns and hanging from the lamppost just outside Rose's bedroom. The body of the goat was nowhere to be found. Additionally, inside the house were her bloody footprints, remnants of her frantic search for me and Rose. Detective Vasquez, a calm and collected figure, began jotting down details of the disturbing events. His composed demeanor surprised me, given the sheer abnormality of the situation. I had never heard of anything remotely similar happening to anyone before, yet he seemed unfazed by the grotesque scene. Occasionally, he glanced up at me while making notes in his pad, nodding in agreement as I recounted what had transpired. His composure, almost as if he expected such occurrences, added an eerie layer to the already chilling ordeal.
Perhaps you might consider purchasing a firearm in the future to safeguard yourself and your family,
he suggested, pointing his pen at me and arching an eyebrow. I'm not particularly keen on guns, I replied.
Well, it appears that woman wasn't particularly fond of you either. Mr. Salvator, you narrowly escaped a dangerous situation this time. I'd rather not have to come back here in the future and end up having to take you out in a body bag,
he warned. Do you think she'll come back? I inquired anxiously. He gently rested his hand on my shoulder. signaling a desire for a more confidential conversation. Glancing over his shoulder to ensure his colleagues weren't within earshot, he leaned in and spoke quietly.
Mr. Salvatore, naturally, we'll have an officer stationed outside your house in case the woman returns. But in my experience, when an attempt of this magnitude occurs, the perpetrator is often inclined to try again. Unfortunately, in cases like these, especially involving children, the outcome is rarely favorable for the family protecting them. Please understand, I'm not trying to alarm you.
He continued earnestly.
I simply want you and your daughter to be safe. The police will do everything within our power to ensure your protection, but it's also crucial for you to enhance our chances of success by taking proactive measures.
I understand, Detective, and I appreciate all the advice.
I'm glad. You're a good guy and you have a beautiful daughter. I intend for things to stay that way. There are things happening here, things that aren't immediately apparent. I think there's more to this than meets the eye.
Like what?
Mr. Salvatore, there are truly dark forces at play in this town. It's been plagued with them for a while.
He explained cryptically.
I can't go into specific details yet until I have concrete evidence, but I'll keep you informed soon as I uncover anything. Take care,
He concluded, gently tapping my shoulder before he walked away. As he left, the conversation lingered in my mind, leaving me with more questions and a growing sense of pessimism about the future for both Rose and myself. I'd made the decision to keep Rose from school for the entire week, choosing to keep her under my constant supervision. The mere thought of her being away from me sparked an intense wave of worry, causing my mind to spiral with overthinking. While I held complete trust in her teacher, Miss Violet, and the head teacher, Mrs. Marshall, the separation deeply concerned me. I believed it was in Rose's best interest, and thankfully Mrs. Marshall agreed, generously offering me the time off that both Rose and I required. The trauma of recent events hinted at a need for therapy, but that would have to wait. Additionally, heeding Detective Vasquez's advice, I reluctantly purchased a handgun. Despite my discomfort with it, the old saying rang true. I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. My determination to safeguard Rose drove me to take whatever measures necessary to protect her. Rose remained deeply affected by the horrifying events, yet with each passing day, her restlessness grew. She missed her school, her friends, and the routine of her daily life. There's only so many board games and TV shows a 6-year-old can play and watch with her dad. Despite my desire to let her return, I couldn't bring myself to trust that it was safe yet. Even though the subsequent nights were uneventful and the witch hadn't made a reappearance, each night felt like a suspenseful ordeal for both of us. Sharing a room provided some comfort, but I couldn't begin to fathom having Rose sleep alone, particularly in the room where a malevolent presence had lurked, or a goat's head had been gruesomely displayed outside her window. During the eerie quietness of the nights, I remained vigilant, straining my ears for any peculiar sounds and meticulously investigating every noise. The approach of the witching hour only intensified my unease. While Rose slept soundly, I found myself unable to relax. My anxiety refused to allow me. I had contemplated moving to a new house as soon as finances permitted, but my circumstances wouldn't allow it presently. The financial strain of being a single parent weighed heavily on my ability to make immediate changes. Fortunately, one afternoon, Rose received a visit to partially relieve her boredom. It was from her head teacher, Mrs. Marshall, come in to check on how we were coping. As Rose happily entertained herself with crayons, Mrs. Marshall's thoughtful gift, we seized the opportunity for a private conversation, delving into updates and general small talk. Before long, our dialogue veered towards the witch who had been stalking us. Mrs. Marshall leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper.
I've conducted some thorough research, and though it might be unsettling to hear, I believe it's crucial for you to know. I've contacted a select few acquaintances deeply entrenched in the occult. They hold high-ranking positions that require significant favors to even gain an audience. The information I'm about to reveal You won't find anywhere else.
She reached into her bag that was under the coffee table and lifted out a huge, aged book. Its cover a patchwork of faded leather and ancient symbols. Its pages, yellowed with age and delicately frayed at the edges. She carefully opened the book and with care turned the pages till she reached her desired destination.
I fear the malevolent witch targeting Rose intends her as a sacrifice.
She whispered to me. My hand instinctively covered my mouth, suppressing the gasp that threatened to escape. A sacrifice? My voice trembled with shock.
My so-called friend suggested that the witch haunting Rose intends to sacrifice her for someone specific, to appease this specific entity.
Who the hell is this someone? I managed to choke out, my voice trembling.
Not really a someone, but something. A high-ranking demon from hell.
Mrs. Marshall revealed. I was horrified, unable to form words as my mouth remained open, my gaze locked with Mrs. Marshall's. She broke eye contact and swiftly spun her grimoire around for me to see. The illustration depicted a terrifying beast, half man and half goat. Its muscular torso resembled that of a man, but its lower body was comprised of hairy goat legs. Its head was that of a horrifying goat, adorned with massive, thick black horns. It was an image of pure terror. Why would this witch seek to appease such a monstrous entity? What could possibly motivate her to involve herself with it?
Quite simply, Ben. Power. Sacrificing or gifting such an innocent soul to a high-ranking demon of hell will grant you endless possibilities.
She set her eyes wide with fear, her expression nervous. A Goatman can grant you such things?
Quiet, Ben. We dare not speak his name aloud. It would only invite his unwanted attention upon you.
In that instant, a resounding knock echoed through the silence, jolting us all with affright. Yet, as I answered the door, the tension dissolved into relief. There stood Mrs. Violet, with her arms folded and a warm smile gracing her lips. She breathed life into the room.
Hey there. Did I happen to disrupt a moment?
She teased, mischief twinkling in her eyes. Rose dashed towards Violet with outstretched arms, enveloping her in a tight hug, nestling into the comforting embrace of Mrs. Violet's waist.
No need to worry. You're not interrupting a thing.
Mrs. Marshall chimed in, gracefully gathering her bag with the grimoire tucked inside. With a brief farewell, she made her exit through the front door.
I'll catch up with you guys tomorrow,
she called back before leaving. Miss Violet cast me a quizzical look, her brows frowning slightly in confusion. She relaxed her shrugged shoulders and released a held breath, exhaling the tension that had gripped her.
So I've bought some things with me that I've left outside in the car. I was hoping that I could cook for you guys tonight. If that's okay with you, of course, Ben.
Miss Violet's excitement bubbled in her voice, her gaze flicking eagerly between Rose and me. Surprised, I found myself momentarily speechless. Was this a date? Or was she simply being kind because she knew what both Rose and I had been through? Rose tugged on my shirt, silently pleading for me to agree. It was endearing. Are you kidding me? That would be fantastic, I managed to reply, striving to conceal my excitement.
Great. You won't regret it. I'm an amazing cook,
said Miss Violet, her enthusiasm infectious. She tenderly stroked Rose's cheek before flashing me a warm smile. With that, she gracefully spun around and headed off, promising,
I'll just dash to the car and grab my things. I'll be back in a jiffy.
Dinner with Miss Violet proved to be a delightful experience. Though I would never entertain the thought of replacing my late wife, her presence brought a renewed sense of joy and laughter to our home, filling it with warmth once more. Witnessing Rose's happiness as she playfully interacted with Violet was a sight to behold, a newfound brightness that had entered our lives. Following dinner, Rose asked that Miss Violet tuck her into bed, and I happily obliged. As they ascended the stairs together, I took the opportunity to pour us some drinks by the fireplace. Settling onto one of the burgundy-colored couches positioned before the crackling flames, I awaited her return, embracing the cozy ambience of the evening. Violet descended the stairs with graceful steps after tucking in Rose. She reached for her glass and clinked it against mine, offering a silent toast with a warm smile. Taking a seat beside me on the couch, she leisurely sipped her drink, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the fireplace, the flickering light casting a soft glow on her brown eyes as they shimmered in the firelight. We shared conversation and relaxed together, savoring each other's company. The drinks flowed freely, and Violet crafted a couple of cocktails she dubbed special. While they didn't taste particularly remarkable, I kept that observation to myself, not wanting to dampen the mood. As the night progressed, Violet gradually began to share details of her private past with me. She confided in me, revealing aspects she claimed she had never disclosed to anyone before, expressing her belief that I deserved to understand this part of her life.
During my childhood, my parents decided to take me on my first camping trip, thinking that my fascination with nature and animals would make it an enjoyable experience for me. And it was, for the most part. We ventured deep into the woods, far beyond the tree line of your backyard, actually. At the time, my parents were oblivious to the true dangers lurking in the woods. My dad brought along bear spray and other typical camping protection, but little did they know.
As she spoke, fatigue gradually crept over me. I suspected I had indulged in one too many drinks, yet I made a conscious effort to remain engaged as she continued with her narrative.
That night, my parents shared the tent with me. They drifted off to sleep swiftly, serenaded by the tranquil symphony of the forest. While most people find such sounds soothing, as a child, it only kept me awake. My mind plagued by fears of lurking predators. My restless stirring must have awakened my dad, as he eventually left the tent to go pee.
I'll be right back.
When he didn't return after a while, my mother grew concerned and went out to find him, leaving me alone inside the tent. Listening attentively for any sign of my parents, I noticed something strange. The sounds of hooting owls and chirping crickets abruptly stopped, and a wave of fear washed over me. I knew that the sudden silence signaled the presence of a predator nearby. As the minutes ticked by with no sign of my parents, I heard drops hitting the roof of the tent. It sounded like it had started to rain, unable to bear being alone any longer and worried about my missing parents. I stepped outside the tent, only to realize it wasn't raining at all. I looked up to see what was dripping on my tent, and to this day, I remember every detail with photographic clarity. My parents were hanging from a tree above our tent by their feet, a rope tied around their ankles securing them to a branch. Their arms hung lifelessly, their bodies swaying gently. They had been decapitated, and their blood was pouring down over the tent. It isn't natural for someone so young to lose their parents, especially in such a horrific way.
She recounted, her voice surprisingly calm as she relived the traumatic memory. I watched her, a profound urge to offer comfort welling up inside me, but words failed me. Shock rendered me speechless, and I struggled to keep my eyes open as the drink I had consumed continued to take its toll. It felt as though I had been drugged, on the brink of unconsciousness.
The horror didn't end there. I heard singing coming from deep within the woods, an eerie melody that almost hypnotized me, drawing me away from my parents and the tent, pulling me deeper into the dark forest. There, around a fire, I found a group of old, wrinkled women dancing. They were witches, and I'm certain they were the ones who killed my parents. I was offered a deal eventually, eternal life and youth, never to suffer my parents' fate, if I traded my soul. All I had to do was make a verbal pact with the Goatman.
My eyelids grew heavy, and I could no longer keep them open as the world around me blurred and faded. I felt my body sinking deeper into the couch. Violet's voice became muffled and distant. Surrendering to the pull of sleep, I lost consciousness. I was dead to my surroundings and the world. I woke up alone in the middle of the night, lying on a hard wooden floor. The rough texture of dirt and dust clung to the floorboards beneath me. I found myself in a pitch-black room, my body aching from the unforgiving surface. Struggling to move at first, I slowly sat up, trying to get my bearings and figure out where I was. Gradually, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, revealing that I had somehow ended up in my attic. Then an overwhelming stench hit me, a horrific smell of rotting meat. It was so potent it made me gag. In the darkness, not far from where I sat, I heard disturbing noises like something was eating something wet. I called out, asking who was there, but was met with only a cat's meow. The cat trotted over to me and rubbed against me. As I inspected it more closely, I realized it was Miss Violet's cat Salem. I crawled past the cat toward a dark figure motionless in the corner of the room. The stench grew stronger as I got closer. I could hear the buzzing of flies swarming around the figure. Reluctantly, I reached out to inspect the shadowy mass, and what I felt made me wish I hadn't. My hands brushed against something hard and wet, and to my horror, I realized it was a body. Praying it wasn't Rose, I frantically examined it. The body was far too large to be my daughter. Then it struck me. The cat, Salem, had been eating the corpse. As my vision adjusted further, I could make out the clothes on the half-eaten body. To my terror, I recognized Mrs. Marshall. She was cradling herself in death, a gruesome end that she didn't deserve. Maggots swarmed over her rotting corpse, wriggling so vigorously it almost seemed as if Mrs. Marshall were still moving. How could this have happened to her? The last time I saw her was when Miss Violet had visited. Suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. Could this have been Violet's doing? She wouldn't. I began my descent from the attic, climbing down the wooden ladder to the floor where Rose's bedroom was located, only to find her dark room empty. My daughter wasn't where Miss Violet had tucked her in. Where was Rose? Where was Miss Violet? Had she drugged me? Could she have slipped a sedative into the cocktails she made for me as we conversed by the fireplace? Had she kidnapped my daughter? Questions and horrific scenarios flooded my mind. Frantically, I searched my home, but I couldn't find my daughter. Panic set in, and I felt sick to my stomach with anxiety and frustration. The feeling was unbearable. There wasn't a single clue left behind, and I couldn't think straight. Just as I felt I was on the verge of losing my mind, I heard a distant melody, faint but distinguishable. It sounded like someone singing. The singing seemed to be coming from outside. I quickly exited the house through the back door. Pausing on the porch, I held my breath and I strained to listen. The haunting melody grew clearer. It seemed to be emanating from beyond the tree line, deep within the thick, dark forest that encircled my home. A trap, perhaps, meant to lure me out? But I had no other choice. I ran back inside the house and grabbed a flashlight. Driven by desperation, I plunged into the night, determined to follow the only clue I had to find my daughter. The torchlight's beam pierced the night's darkness, forming a barrier between me and the dangers lurking in the shadows. I dashed past the thick ferns, their branches clawing at my face and arms as I fought through. The lifeless branches reached out like skeletal fingers, snagging at my clothes. Deeper into the woods I ventured, each step a struggle against the uneven ground that threatened to trip me with every stride. My exhausted lungs burned with each breath. My legs threatened to buckle beneath me, but I pressed on, driven by desperation. With every step, the singing swelled in volume, guiding me like a siren's call through the darkness. In the depths of the woods, I stumbled upon a concealed cave, its existence a chilling surprise in the wilderness, and its entrance bathed in flickering light from a naked flame within. The dancing shadows, beckoning me forward into the unknown depths. I entered the cave with cautious steps, mindful not to disturb whoever might be inside. The cave's ceiling was high, allowing me ample space to stand tall as I ventured further inside. My gaze swept over eerie symbols, pentagrams and ominous glyphs that were etched into the stone walls. Under different circumstances, I wouldn't have dared to enter such an eerie tunnel in the middle of nowhere. In my stealthy intrusion, a twig snapped beneath my foot, the sound echoing through the cavern, shattering and replacing the serene melody that had filled the cavern before. With a sinking feeling, I realized my mistake. Whoever dwelled within now knew of my presence. With the element of surprise gone, my steps quickened toward a wider chamber deep within the cave, where I found the source of light. In front of a blazing campfire, Miss Violet crouched over a motionless figure, surrounded by crows greedily feasting on the remains. She glanced up at me slowly, her smile twisted. Blood stained her lips, with bits of raw flesh wedged between her teeth, but it was her eyes that chilled me. They bore a familiarity that sent shivers through me. They were my daughter's eyes. In an instant, the truth crashed over me like a tidal wave. The lifeless form beside Miss Violet and the crows was Rose, lying lifeless and half-eaten on the floor. Her eyes were gone, replaced by black, hollowed-out circles. Her limbs were torn off, and holes gnawed by the crows covered her small body. This sick bitch had been eating my daughter. Rage erupted within me, coursing through my veins like wildfire. Every fiber of my being screamed for vengeance as I charged toward Violet, consumed by a singular intent: to unleash brutal vengeance upon this fucking woman. As I charged toward her, she swiftly retrieved a small brown doll crafted from fabric and straw. With a blade drenched in blood, she plunged it into the doll's leg. Instantly, searing agony shot through my thigh, causing me to crumble onto the grimy stone floor. Fury surged within me, urging me to rise, but before I could gather my strength, Violet stabbed the doll once more. Another wave of excruciating pain shot through my other leg, sending me crashing to the ground once more. To her amusement, she laughed, sinister and mocking my helpless situation.
I truly am sorry, Ben, but this is the price I must pay to maintain my youth and beauty. Don't you think I'm beautiful? Especially now that I have your daughter's eyes?
She taunted as she giggled like a sinister child, her hands stained with blood covering her mouth. I tried to desperately crawl towards her, my helpless legs dragging behind me.
I understand your pain, Ben, but there's absolutely nothing you can do.
With a sinister grin, she manipulated the voodoo doll, bending its arm, and in cruel synchrony, my own arm snapped with agonizing force.
This tradition predates even the Salem witch era.
She continued, her words sealing my fate in the shadows of history. She sneered, watching the hope drain from my eyes as I realized the grim truth of my fate.
You see now, don't you? There's no avenging your daughter, no escaping your own demise. But fear not.
She continued, her tone sickeningly sweet.
I won't devour you like I did Rose. No, her sacrifice was solely for these beautiful eyes and eternal youth, of course.
With a twisted grin, she delved into her own tragic history, weaving a tale of fear and desperation.
If you had endured as many years as I have, you'd understand. In this cruel world, there's nothing but pain and suffering. Look around you.
She gestured to Rose's lifeless, mutilated body.
You'll lose everyone you love, even yourself, in the end. After my parents were murdered,
she recounted, her voice tinged with lingering sorrow.
I spent my days haunted by the fear of what might happen to me. Disease, violence, the specter of death always lurking in the shadows. But then, I struck a bargain with the Goatman, a powerful demon that doesn't take no for an answer.
Her expression haunted as if memories of the fearsome entity flooded her mind.
However, he delivers on his promises. Ever since our pact, I've been granted eternal life and youth. Death holds no sway over me now. You think I'm an evil bitch, don't you? But in this world, there is no such thing as good or evil. Only weakness and power. So you see, I'm not a monster. I'm simply ahead of the game.
I lay on the ground, consumed by despair, as this deranged woman attempted to garner sympathy from me after mercilessly taking the life of my innocent daughter. A crow alighted on the witch's outstretched arm, where she held the voodoo doll. She stroked it gently. Then the bird moved to the doll and pecked at one of its eyes. In a horrifying synchrony, shooting pain followed by blindness engulfed my own eye.
Since I rather liked you, allow me to grant you a final act of mercy. I'll reunite you with your daughter and wife in the afterlife.
With a flick of her wrist, the witch tossed the doll into the fire. In an instant, flames engulfed my body, searing me with agonizing heat before the darkness consumed me. Don't pity me for this ending. I've made my peace. Just remember, be cautious of whom you trust and tread carefully in these woods.